Hello and welcome to this episode of the Academic Papers Podcast, where we celebrate academics and bring education to everyone. Today, we're diving into a paper that really made me think.
Okay.
Unequal exchange of labor in the world economy.
Yeah.
It's by Jason Hickel, Morena Hanbury Lemos, and Felix Barbour.
Right.
And it digs into something we all kind of know intuitively, that the global economy isn't exactly fair.
Yeah.
But this paper goes beyond just saying that and tries to actually measure the imbalance of labor between the global north and south.
It's a fascinating approach. Instead of just looking at trade figures, they try to quantify the amount of labor embodied in the goods that flow between countries.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly?
Yeah.
Embodied labor.
Essentially, it's the total amount of human work that goes into producing a product.
Right.
So think about a smartphone. It's not just the assembly line worker putting the pieces together.
Yeah.
It's also the miners extracting the raw materials, the engineers designing the components, the truck drivers transporting everything, and so on.
All right.
All those hours of work are embodied in that final product.
So this paper is arguing that we need to look at how much labor is being traded between countries.
Exactly.
Not just the dollar value of the goods themselves.
Because what they found is that while the global south contributes a massive amount of labor to the world economy, they receive a disproportionately small share of the income.
And just how big is that gap?
Well, prepare to be surprised.
Okay.
In 2021, the global south contributed a staggering 90% of the labor powering the world economy.
Wow.
But when it came to income, they only received 21%.
Wow. That's a much bigger difference than I expected.
Yeah.
It's like the global south is doing most of the work, but reaping very few of the rewards.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And that's where this idea of unequal exchange comes in.
Okay.
The paper argues that the North is essentially importing significantly more embodied labor from the South
Right.
than it's exporting back. It's a net appropriation of labor power.
So it's not just that the North is paying less for goods from the South.
Right.
It's that they're getting a huge amount of labor for their money.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the researchers actually put a number on this labor drain. They found that in 2021, the North effectively appropriated 826 billion hours of embodied labor from the South.
826 billion hours?
Yeah.
That number is just mind-blowing.
It's a big number.
How can we even wrap our heads around that?
Imagine the combined workforces of the United States and the European Union.
Okay.
That's roughly the scale of the labor power we're talking about
Yeah.
being appropriated from the South in a single year.
Wow. That really puts it into perspective.
Yeah.
And it challenges the assumption that this is all about low-skill labor being exploited.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The paper actually found that the North net imports more high-skilled labor from the South than it receives through trade with other northern countries.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So even highly skilled workers in the South are contributing to this unequal exchange?
Yes, and there are real-world examples to illustrate this.
Okay.
Think about the tech industry.
Okay.
Remember when Steve Jobs, the former CEO of Apple, said they needed 30,000 engineers?
Right.
And he couldn't find that many in America?
Right. And then his successor, Tim Cook, talked about how Apple relies on the massive pool of high-skilled engineers in China
Exactly.
to meet their needs.
Those statements highlight how the North relies on Southern high-skilled labor,
Yeah?
even while benefiting from significant wage disparities between the regions.
So how big are these wage gaps exactly?
Well, for work of equal skill,
Yeah.
wages in the South were between 87% and 95% lower than in the North,
Okay.
according to the study's finding.
87% to 95% lower.
Yeah,
That's a huge difference.
it is.
It's like someone doing the same job in the South is earning a fraction of what their counterpart in the North would make.
And what's even more striking is that this disparity isn't limited to just a few industries.
Oh.
It exists across all sectors,
Yep.
from agriculture and mining to manufacturing and services.
So it's a systemic issue,
Yeah,
not just a few bad apples.
right.
That's incredibly concerning.
Yeah.
What does this constant drain of labor mean for the global South?
Well, one major consequence is that it deprives the South of the productive capacity they need for their own advancement.
Okay.
Imagine if those 826 billion hours of labor could be invested in building infrastructure,
Yeah.
improving healthcare, and strengthening education systems within the South.
It's like their own resources are being siphoned away,
Right, yeah.
preventing them from reaching their full potential.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a key point this paper highlights.
Okay.
It's not just about economics, it's about justice and fairness.
Of course, there are those who argue that these wage gaps are simply a reflection of productivity.
Yeah.
They say that workers in the North are more productive, so they deserve higher wages.
Right.
How does this paper address that argument?
The authors argue that the traditional ways we measure productivity can be misleading in this context and actually mask the reality of this situation.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure.
I mean, it seems logical that higher productivity would lead to higher wages.
The problem is that standard productivity metrics often focus on income or GDP per person employed.
Okay.
But these measures are simply reflections of prices, not actual physical output.
So you're saying that if wages are artificially suppressed in the South,
Yes.
their productivity will appear lower, even if they're actually producing the same amount of goods?
Precisely.
Yeah,
It creates a distorted picture of the situation.
okay.
The paper argues that the power imbalances in the global economy
Yeah.
directly influence the prices themselves.
Meaning the North has the power to dictate lower prices for goods from the South,
That's right.
regardless of the actual labor that goes into producing them.
And this dynamic completely undermines the argument that wage differences are solely based on productivity.
Okay.
In fact, there's evidence to suggest that workers in southern export industries often produce as much or even more physical output per hour.
Wow. Than their northern counterparts.
So if it's not just about productivity, what can be done about this unequal exchange?
Well, the paper does offer some potential solutions.
Okay.
And I think they're worth exploring in more detail.
Yeah.
One intriguing idea is the establishment of international wage floors.
So setting a minimum wage that applies globally,
Yeah.
regardless of where the work is performed.
Exactly.
That seems like a bold idea.
It is.
What kind of impact could that have?
Well, it would certainly help to prevent the race to the bottom in terms of wages.
Okay.
Right now, countries often compete to offer the cheapest labor, which only exacerbates these disparities.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It would also create a safety net for workers in the global south,
Right.
ensuring they receive a fair wage for their contributions.
Absolutely.
And another idea they propose is setting minimum resource prices. Kind of like fair trade practices where producers are guaranteed a certain price for their raw materials.
Yeah.
I can see how that could benefit the global south. Exactly.
Yeah.
It would help prevent the exploitation of natural resources in the south.
Right.
And ensure that they receive fair compensation for the materials extracted from their land.
These solutions seem promising,
Yeah?
but are they realistic? Is there any political will to implement such changes?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of the challenge.
Okay.
The paper acknowledges that the ultimate solution lies in shifting the balance of power on a global scale.
Right.
This means empowering southern nations to reclaim control over their own resources and determine their own economic destinies.
It's a monumental task,
It is.
but one that is absolutely essential if we hope to create a truly just and sustainable world.
It's about breaking free from dependency on northern capital and charting a new course, one that prioritizes human well-being over profit.
It's a powerful message, and one that resonates deeply with the challenges we see playing out in the world today. The paper has given us a lot to consider.
It has.
But it also leaves us with a sense of hope
that
a better future is possible.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's a call to action, urging us to engage in conversations about global justice, ethical consumption, and the need for a more equitable world.
And that brings us to the end of part 1 of our deep dive into this fascinating paper.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still much more to unpack.
Right.
Join us in part 2 as we delve deeper into the solutions proposed in the paper
Okay.
and explore the path toward a more just and sustainable future.
Sounds good. These solutions like international wage floors and minimum resource prices might sound radical, but they're really just about leveling the playing field.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Instead of a system where some countries are constantly being exploited for their labor and resources,
Right.
we need a system that values those contributions fairly.
Exactly. And the paper argues that these changes won't happen overnight.
Right.
They require a fundamental shift in how we view the global economy, moving away from the current model of extraction and toward one of genuine partnership and collaboration.
So it's not just about tweaking the current system, it's about reimagining it entirely.
Right.
That sounds like a daunting task.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
But the paper also points to historical precedents for such transformations.
Yeah.
Think about the labor movements of the 19th and 20th centuries that led to widespread improvements in working conditions and wages.
Right. Those movements were driven by ordinary people demanding a fairer system,
Exactly.
and they ultimately succeeded in bringing about significant change.
And the same can be true for the global economy.
Okay.
The paper argues that change requires a political struggle within southern nations to reclaim their economic sovereignty and chart their own course.
Similar to the anti-colonial movements of the past,
Yes.
where nations fought for independence and control over their own destinies.
In many ways, it's a continuation of that struggle. It's about demanding self-determination and the right to develop in a way that benefits their own people, not just foreign corporations or wealthy nations.
That resonates deeply with what we see happening in the world today.
Yeah.
Many countries in the global south are pushing back against exploitative practices
Exactly.
and asserting their right to a more equitable share of the global pie.
It's a movement that's gaining momentum.
Yeah.
And this paper provides a powerful intellectual framework for understanding the dynamics at play.
It also highlights the interconnectedness of the global economy.
Absolutely.
It's a reminder that our choices as consumers in the North have real consequences for workers in the South.
The seemingly low prices we pay for goods often come at a hidden cost.
Right.
A cost that's borne by those who contribute the majority of the world's labor, but receive a disproportionately small share of the rewards.
So it's not just about governments and corporations making changes.
Right.
It's about all of us being more conscious consumers.
I completely agree.
Understanding where our products come from and the conditions under which they're made.
It's about recognizing that our actions, even seemingly small ones, can contribute to either perpetuating or dismantling this system of unequal exchange.
It's a call for greater awareness, but also for action.
Yeah.
What can ordinary people do to support the movement for a more just and equitable global economy?
There are many ways to get involved.
Yeah.
Supporting organizations that advocate for fair trade practices, ethical sourcing, and worker rights is a great start. Educating ourselves and others about the hidden costs of globalization is also crucial.
Right.
And of course, making conscious choices about the products we buy and the companies we support can send a powerful message.
It all starts with recognizing that we're not just passive consumers.
Exactly.
We have agency, and our choices can make a difference.
And as we wrap up this part of our discussion, I think it's important to acknowledge that the solutions presented in this paper aren't a silver bullet. They're a starting point, a framework for reimagining a global economy that works for everyone, not just a privileged few.
That's a great way to sum it up.
Yeah.
It's not about finding easy answers. It's about engaging in a continuous process of learning, reflection, and action.
And ultimately, it's about reclaiming the power of hope. The belief that a more just and sustainable world is not just a dream, but a possibility that we can create together.
I think that's a perfect note to end this part of our conversation on.
Yeah.
Join us in part 3 as we explore the long-term implications of unequal exchange and consider what a truly equitable global future might look like. So we've talked about the problem of unequal exchange, and we've explored some potential solutions, but I think the big question that lingers is, what happens if we don't make these changes? What are the long-term implications for the world if this trend continues?
That's a crucial question, and one that deserves serious consideration. If the Global South continues to be drained of its resources and labor power, it's hard to imagine a truly sustainable future for anyone.
Right, it seems like a recipe for instability, both economic and political.
Exactly. When a large portion of the world's population is denied a fair share of the benefits of economic growth, it creates fertile ground for resentment, conflict, and instability.
And that instability doesn't just stay contained within the Global South.
Right.
It ripples out, impacting everyone.
Absolutely. We're living in an interconnected world. Economic crises, environmental degradation, and political unrest in one part of the world inevitably affect us all. So even from a purely self-interested perspective, it makes sense to address these imbalances.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together, for better or for worse. And the choices we make today will have a profound impact on the world we leave for future generations.
I couldn't agree more. This paper isn't just an academic exercise. It's a call to action, urging us to think critically about the systems we've created and to work towards a more just and sustainable future for all.
So where can our listeners go to learn more about this research and explore these ideas further?
Well, the paper itself is definitely worth a read. You can find it on academicjobs.com. Just search for the author's name, Jason Hickel.
Perfect. We'll be sure to include a link in the show notes as we wrap up this deep dive. I'm left with a sense of both urgency and hope. The challenges are immense, but so is our capacity for change if we can shift our perspectives and embrace the principles of fairness and equity. A better world is within reach.
I share that sentiment. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a future where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of where they were born or what circumstances they were born into.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we hope this conversation has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue exploring these vital issues. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better world.